Get on with it. Open your Bibles to Galatians chapter 3, please. And while you're doing that, I'll just tell you, this passage I want to look at this morning is the passage that the Lord used to bring me to Himself. When was it, 1984 or 85? I came home late at night after work and turned on the TV. And, in 1985, there was nothing on late. On cable was brand new then, and the only thing on was the religious shows. And so I'm flipping around, and I came across this guy, and I was just in shock. He was an older guy. He had long white hair over to it, down below his collar. He had a long white beard. He was smoking a cigar about that long. And I said, I got to watch this guy. He had books stacked up all around him. It was in a TV studio that, they weren't trying to hide it behind a set or anything. It was just a TV studio. You could see the cables and the cameras and whatnot. And this guy opens up the Bible and he starts talking about Galatians chapter 3. And, I'd never heard that. I'd never heard the message of these verses before. And after a while, I said, well, wait a minute, this is crazy. I'm getting religious. Flip the channel. And it's another religious channel. And the guy on TV, he looks right into the camera. And he says, you know that what you're doing is either going to kill you or you're going to end up in jail. And I looked at the TV and I said, oh, is that right? And the guy on TV said, that's right. And so I went, Lord, okay, I surrender. It was this passage that changed my life, turned it up, inside out, upside down. Let me ask you something. Do you ever feel like you've got to get your act together before you'll be okay with God? Got to have it all together, cross the T's, dot the I's, wash behind the ears, all that kind of stuff. You got to measure up. Some of us fall into that. We feel like we need to measure up or God's not going to be pleased with us. He's not going to accept us or love us or bless us or comfort us or protect us or provide us for us. And so we go about, trying to earn what can only be received as a gift. I've observed this pattern in the life of believers. Now, let me think. It was 85 when that TV night, and that's been about 33 years ago. So in those 33 years, I've observed this pattern among believers. At first, you are red hot for the Lord. It's just point me in the right direction and let me go, and I'm going to change the world, or at least my living room or my office. And that goes, you receive forgiveness, you experience that sense of cleansing and relief that comes with it. You welcome the Lord's influence in every area of your life. You find yourself with this hunger for His Word, and you enjoy fellowshipping with His people. And you look forward to those quiet times of prayer and worship and communion, where you just bask in His presence. Do you do that? Because if you don't, I encourage you. Same thing as when the weather turns nice like it is now. I always remember that first day of the season where I go out and sit in a lawn chair and just kind of look up at the sun and let it, soak it up. And that's what a lot of new believers do, everything that has anything to do with the Lord. I remember I joined a church. Well, I didn't join. I started attending because this particular church didn't have members. If you wanted to be a part of it, you just show up. And I started doing that, and man, I couldn't wait. Sunday, I worked all week in the office, worked for the city of Vancouver. Oh, I'm going to go to church Sunday morning. And back in those days, we came back on Sunday night, and then even on Wednesday night. I don't know how the pastor did it, just a teaching machine, but 3 sermons a week, and I just had to be there. And then I signed up for some classes at Multnomah Bible College because I was a couple of nights a week when they didn't have church. And because I knew that all I wanted was to surround myself with God's people and God's truth and just soak it up, soak it in. I didn't have a career goal at that point in time. If you would have told me someday you're going to pastor several churches, I would have said, you're out of your mind. Not me. I'll go to church, I'll play the guitar, I'll sing, I'll sit and listen, I'll help, but are you kidding me, pastor? Me? Nah, never going to happen. Well, God had other plans. So you're a brand new believer and you're on fire for the Lord. But then after a while, you do cool down as time goes by. It's just a little bit at first. Your time in the Word doesn't seem quite so powerful, doesn't have that same thrill it once did, and so you tend to kind of slip away from that once daily habit. Your prayer times become shorter and less frequent. You begin to feel a little guilty about that, but even though God doesn't expect you to be perfect, in the flesh, deep inside you are sure that God must be disappointed with you after all He's done for you. And then look at the way you live. Oh, the Lord must be unhappy with me. And it's at that point that people often either give up on the whole thing and go back to life in the world without the Lord. Because Christianity is just too hard. Or they decide to just buckle down. By golly, I'm going to do this. If it kills me, I'm going to get my act together. Please, somebody, give me some rules to live by. Rules aren't bad in and of themselves, but you've got to remember this. Any attempt, how would you say this? Any attempt to earn or deserve God's favor or God's love, it reveals that we've forgotten the most essential element of this whole relationship, faith. It's been a couple years ago I taught on faith. This is not that same message, I'll just tell you. But we do. We're red hot for a while, and then we kind of cool out and fall away. And we think, man, I got to do something to make God pleased with me again. And that is exactly what Paul's letter to the church in Galatia is all about. Now, just in case you don't know, maybe I should have got a map, but Galatia is not a town, it's a region. It's a lot like we might think of as a county. So Galatia, up in what is now Turkey, covers a fair amount of territory, and Paul wrote, when he traveled there, he would do what he always did, go into the synagogue, if there was one, and teach, and then after they kicked him out for heresy, he would go somewhere else, down by the water hole, by the well, by the city gate, someone's house, whatever, and then he would continue to preach and then go on to the next town and the next town, and then after he's back, he wrote these letters to these churches that he started. Now here's the thing about the people in Galatia, okay? They had heard the gospel, and they'd responded to it by putting their faith in Jesus. But then they became convinced that they needed to get their act together, that they needed to do something to measure up. And then they'd be okay with God. The lesson I want you to take home with you today is that, we start by faith, but we also finish by faith. The same faith that saves us keeps us. It's not saved by faith and then a whole nother, adventure starts up. It's saved by faith, stay saved by faith. So let's read these first 5 verses of Galatians 3. And I'm reading from the New King James. O foolish Galatians, who's bewitched you that you should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was clearly portrayed among you as crucified? This only I want to learn from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Are you so foolish? Having begun in the Spirit, are you now being made perfect by the flesh? Have you suffered so many things in vain, if indeed it was in vain? Therefore, he who supplies the Spirit to you and works miracles among you, does he do it by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Okay. When you catch yourself thinking that you've got to measure up to some sort of standard, you got to get your act together, then the first thing that this passage tells us is you need to return to the cross. Who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth? You know, it's the cross that makes us okay with God. You know, hopefully you know the gospel. I mean, sin separated us from God from birth. On the cross, Jesus took our sin, exchanged it for his righteousness. And when we obey that truth, that's what he means when he says, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth? Well, the truth is Jesus died for your sin. How do you obey that? You walk in it. You live in it. You believe it. And you let that truth make a difference in every area of your life. You just believe and live according to that. According to what? That we're okay with God because we trust him simply by believing. Now, apparently the Galatian believers lost sight of that. You Bible students will, remember that this is when these people called the Judaizers came in. And I don't want to go too far afield off on that topic. But the Judaizers came in and told the people in Galatia that this guy Paul, he's okay. He kind of has it together, but he doesn't have it all together, because what you need to do is believe like Paul says, but you also need to obey the law, especially the law of circumcision. And then you'll be saved by grace through faith. Well, of course, say it with me, baloney. Right? Paul says, you're acting like fools. You foolish Galatians. Who's bewitched you? We have a whole lot of really good study tools to tell us exactly what these words mean, but the language doesn't tell us about the attitude behind the words. Think about that. Was Paul angry? You foolish Galatians. Who bewitched you? Is he angry? Is he tender-hearted and soft? Oh, you poor foolish Galatians. Did someone cast a spell on you? He says, you got the gospel up here and all the way down here. You had it. You saw it as if I had a picture of it to show you. With the thing about body cams on the police now, and everywhere you go, somebody whips out their phone and catches a video of whatever the problem is. Well, that's kind of the idea. It's like, look, you guys know the gospel. You know all about the crucifixion, the resurrection, the ascension, and you know God's plan as surely as if we showed it to you on the video. You saw it. So what happened? Somebody cast a spell on you? Are you acting foolish? Paul loved these people. So even though he wasn't, above or beyond a harsh rebuke now and then, I get the idea that this is a different deal. I think he was more baffled, and what's the word? Bemused. It's like, you did what? You foolish Galatians. Who's bewitched you? Did a witch put a spell on you? I can't believe it. It's that's the kind of attitude that I see here. You what? Foolish Galatians. Now, realize this isn't name calling. You foolish Galatians. Paul's not just ticked off and venting and thinking, name calling and all that kind of derogatory stuff. This word translated foolish isn't a derogatory word. It just means not perceiving and not understanding. You Galatians are acting like you don't get it, but you did get it. What happened to you? What's going on? It would appear that you have somehow been persuaded to no longer live according to the truth. That's what he's talking about in this first verse here. Living according to the truth. It would appear, Galatians, that someone has got you way off track. And see, that is the issue. Living according to the truth. Not just on Sunday until 11, or 11:30, you never know. The issue is living according to truth. What truth? Well, that Jesus died on the cross. And when he died on the cross, your sin died with him. See, what we're talking about here in doctrinal terms, in Bible college words, is justification. And that's an easy one. I love that word because you can sort of explain it by saying, I'm just as if I'd never sinned, right? Justified. That's how God sees you. You go, oh yeah, but I got mad this morning when I spilled hot coffee and, I shut my thumb in the car door and the guy in front of me was going too slow and the guy behind me wanted to go too fast. And so I showed him one finger of the peace sign and then he honked at me and then, blah, 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 all that stuff goes on and we forget. We just forget. You foolish Galatians, aren't you getting it? Are you under a spell? Would that explain it? They're persuaded by the Judaizers that they need to be circumcised. And now we don't deal with that specific problem, but we deal with a lot just like it. If you're going to be first of all, there's no such thing as a good Christian, right? If you're a Christian, it's because you're not good. And nobody's good. Now, maybe you can be good at it, but that would be walking by faith, right? Anyway, full circle. We forget that God sees us just as if we never sinned. And, Jesus was crucified for our sin. God declared us not guilty, forgiven, justified, just as if we never sinned. And so Paul brings them and he brings us back to the cross where it started. Listen to the way the New Living has this same verse. Oh, foolish Galatians, what magician has cast an evil spell on you? For you used to see the meaning of Jesus Christ's death as clearly as though I'd shown you a signboard with a picture of Christ dying on the cross. He said, you're not foolish. You did get it. You saw the picture. So when you catch yourself thinking, boy, I got to get my act together, the first thing you need to do is return to the cross. Next thing you got to do, in verses 2, 3, 4, you got to learn to rely on the Spirit. That's what he's teaching these. Oh, I see how it works. How does Dave do this? I'm pushing the button. There you go. It's a tricky button. Okay. So, you return to the cross. You remember that God didn't accept you because of your good behavior. He accepted you because of your faith in Jesus Christ. Okay, we go back to the cross. Then we learn to rely on the Spirit. Now, these verses, Paul asks 3 rhetorical questions. Okay, who knows what a rhetorical question is? Don't answer. Never mind, it's an old joke. Sorry. Okay, verse 2, he says, did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Well, the assumed answer is by believing, by the hearing of faith. Verse 3, he says, having begun in the Spirit, are you now being made perfect by the flesh? Well, the answer is no, I'm not. I'm going to be made perfect, by the Spirit, not the flesh. And in the third question, he says, have you suffered so much? And probably a clearer translation of that word suffered is experienced. It's a Greek word that can refer to good things or bad things. Now, the word suffering implies only bad things, but really the original word means good things too. And it seems to apply not to suffering so much as the experience they've been through. You have been through so much, Galatians. You Christians, you've seen so much. And I hope that wasn't in vain. You saw it. You've been through so much. You saw the Spirit in action. You saw people delivered. You experienced the peace and the rest of a changed life through faith in Jesus Christ. You've been there and you've done that. Now, the assumed answer, again, to all those questions is no. No, we didn't receive the Spirit by following rules, following the law, but by faith. No, we're not being made perfect by following rules, but we're made perfect by following the Spirit. Now, that's the Bible college word sanctification. There's a couple of views on that. We don't need to split hairs about that. But sanctification is that, in some schools of thought, is that process, that transforming process where what we are on the inside, because of our faith in Jesus Christ, our born-again self, works its way to show on the outside. Sanctification. So no, we didn't receive the Spirit by following rules. We're not being made perfect by the law. Our experience of the Spirit in action has not been in vain. Now let me ask you a question. This is not rhetorical, by the way. Did anybody notice an emphasis on the work of the Spirit in these verses? Having been, saved by the Spirit, are you being made perfect in the flesh? No. Any being made perfect is going to be a result of walking in the Spirit, right? Not fulfilling the lusts of the flesh. Walking by faith, not by sight. Just as we look to the cross to be made right with God, we look to the Spirit to live right with God. And we don't need to add rules or works to the equation. I remember I got saved, and after a few weeks, there watching the guy on TV, after a few weeks, I had this weird desire to go to church. I hadn't been to church since I was a kid when my mom drugged me against my will. Kicking and screaming, I don't want to go. Well, no, I wanted to go, but I didn't know where to go. The church I went to when I was a kid, the building was torn down, so I couldn't go back there. So I got out the yellow pages. Remember phone books? That's how long ago it was. So I get out the phone book, churches. Oh man, I had no idea. Page after page, denominations and, the Aardvark Holy Center, and then it goes on from there. And I finally got to the end where it said non-denominational. I thought, well, okay, that. I didn't know anything about denominations, so it just seemed like non-denominational would be the way to go. And then I looked at the biggest ad, not realizing then that it meant the church had the most money. It wasn't about that yet, but they had this big ad, and I said, I'll go there. So I went down there and, was there again, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, and I fell into that new believer trap. I knew I was saved by grace through faith, but now I was going to live like I deserved it. So that means I'm going to go get a pair of shoes that are a couple sizes too small, and I'm going to get a thing. I'm going to make sure the collar chokes me out, even if I'm not wearing a tie, and I'm going to smile even when I'm not happy, and I'm going to say, praise the Lord, brother. Praise the Lord, sister, you dirty, I fell into that, and the preacher took me to this men's clothing store, and he bought me a suit because he didn't like me showing up in my raggedy old jeans. I mean, it wasn't the jeans, it was these particular jeans. He said, no, if you're going to go up front and play. Anyway, he bought me a suit and stuff, and so I started wearing the suit everywhere. What? Going to go down to the Minute Mart and get a gallon of milk? Let me get my suit on, no kidding. And because it just seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed like what I need to do. When I grew up, when you went to church, you had to be physically uncomfortable. That was the rule. And I've still got scars from my mom's fingernails. Even you shut up, that whole business. Anyway, I digress. We return to the cross. We learn to rely on the Spirit. And the last part of this is put the battery back in. Recognize God's plan. Man, I always think about Abraham, or, Abram and Sarai, Abraham and Sarah. And God makes them a promise. Wow, this is great. God promised us we're going to have kids, and then, we're affect the whole world. And it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen. And so years go by after year, 25 years. They give up on God, try to do it their own way. That makes a bigger mess. We're still messed up because of the Arab-Israeli conflict that goes all the way back to then. It's not about the oil and the money. It's about Ishmael and Isaac. But again, I digress. Learning to rely on the Spirit. Let me wrap this up. Recognize God's plan. See, in verse 5, there's another rhetorical question. Therefore, because of all that, he who supplies the Spirit to you and works miracles among you, right? He's probably talking about God there. Does he do it by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? And the answer again is no, not by the works of the law, but by faith. The Spirit's presence and power are from God and the result of faith and faith alone. God doesn't keep track of how many Bible verses you read, although the more the better. God doesn't have a timer for your prayer time, although the more the better. He simply wants to know, do you trust me? Do you believe my word? Do you believe it enough to live like it's true 24/7? Or is it just a Sunday thing, or just when you're in the mood, or just when you're reminded? It's always been God's plan that we get right and stay right with him through faith. And in the other verses here, he brings up Abraham, as I did. Therefore know that only those who are of faith are sons of Abraham. That's a Jewish reference. We're sons of Abraham. That means we're Israelis, we're Hebrews, we're Jews, and simply because of our family tree, we expect certain things to happen. And here we're learning that Abraham was the father of faith, father of our faith. It's his example that we follow. Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. When we believe God, it is credited to us. It is imputed, it is transferred to our account. Righteousness, that's always been God's plan. But I want so badly to have some rules to follow so I can feel good about myself. Right? Well, God's got to pat me on the back now. I helped 2 widows across the street. Crazy stuff. I want so badly to follow the rules, but Jesus came to take away the rules. He actually fulfilled the law for us, fulfilled that covenant, that contract, and we fulfill the law in him through faith. So, feeling like you don't measure up? Return to the cross. You don't know how to keep going? Rely on the Spirit. And you're having a hard time figuring the whole thing out? Well, recognize that it's always been God's plan that we simply trust him, that we believe his promises and live according to his truth. We started by faith and we finish by faith. Amen?